Hello everybody. So this week we're talking about tree worker safety, so let's get into it. So the first thing we want to just kind of talk about and address is the idea that safety always has to be the first concern whenever you're doing any of this sort of work, because the idea is that you're using machinery or you're doing things where the unexpected could happen. And if that's the case, you want to be as safe as possible. Mistakes may happen, but you want to minimize the result of the mistake, or you really want to make sure that there's much more positive to your result than negative to your result. And the way that you do that is that you make safety the first concern, and you really make sure that everything is done with safety in mind. And if you're doing everything with safety in mind, then it's really hard to have really bad mistakes. You're going to have mistakes. People are going to make mistakes. People get tired. People lose concentration, that sort of a thing. But if they understand what's at stake, if they've been given the proper instructions, then hopefully that mistake is minimized to where it's not as problematic as it could be. Another way that you do that is by really working on your culture. And what I mean by that is this idea of safety being an attitude. Safety being the idea that you understand that safety is important, and that all decisions are made with safety in mind, and that if you have this conscious recognition of all the potential risks and hazards, and you've designed a program that is really all about preventing accidents and not making accidents happen, and making sure that when people go out there, their focus is to prevent any accidents from happening. You want to get the job done, but you want to get the job done safely. And getting people to understand that unless you can say the job was done safely, then the job doesn't count, sort of a thing. And really getting people to understand how safety is a complete attitude. It's a culture change. It's an idea that you really have to be concerned with it to really make sure that it happens. And so when we talk about tree worker safety, really the purpose is we want to reduce injury, illness, and death through the establishment and enforcement of standards and regulations. And when we're saying that, notice it says the word reduce, because we know stuff will happen, but we want it to be minimized as much as possible. And if you can minimize it as much as possible, you're probably going to get better outcomes than if you just didn't care in the first place. So let's just go over some quick terminology. If you see the word approved anywhere, that means it's accepted by federal, state, or local jurisdiction, or if we were in Canada, provincial jurisdiction. If you see the word shall, that is a mandatory requirement. And if you see the word should, that's just an advisory recommendation. Although I think anytime we're thinking about safety, and if we really have safety as the first concern and safety is part of our culture, then anytime you hear should, you should also kind of hear the word shall. So let's start off with PPE, because I think it's really the most important part, because really when we're talking about safety, one of the first things we got to do is keep ourselves safe, because if we can keep ourselves safe, then we can hopefully keep other people safe as well. But you really want to make sure that you don't get hurt in the first place, and the first place to start with that is PPE. PPE stands for personal protective equipment. So the idea of what you wear or what you have on you to make sure that you avoid injury. And so I've got the chainsaw up here, but it's not just for the chainsaw, but really focus on the idea of head protection, eye protection, and ear protection. Whether we're working a chipper, or we're using a chainsaw, or we're doing kind of any work with things up above our head, we want head protection. Anything where little pieces could fly in the air, eye protection. Anything with really loud noises, we want ear protection, whether that's earmuffs or earplugs. If we're doing chainsaw work, then we really want leg protection, and whether that's chaps is the easiest form of that, but then we also have there's all sorts of pants and other things where you've got the material that binds up the saw built into the pants. Those are fine too. You really want to have good footwear, because good footwear is important, especially if we're climbing trees, but it's just important overall. Your feet are extremely important. So good steady leather work boots, and then things that you should have. You're not required to, but in my mind, if safety is a concern and safety is an attitude, then if you should need these things, you should have them. And that is gloves. To me, long sleeves, and I know we work in an area where it gets pretty hot, but the idea of when you're working, especially with the chainsaw and other things, you got things that might be whipping around or flying around. Long sleeves are a good idea, and really no dangling materials, especially when working with a chipper. You don't want anything getting stuck and kind of pulling you in or causing any problems. And so those are the basics of PPE. At the very basics, we want the head, eye, ear, and leg protection, but the work boots, gloves, long sleeves, and no dangling material are also very much recommended. So here's an example of a tree climber and what they'd be wearing. So they've got the face shield with a helmet. Notice they have a face shield, but they still have safety glasses on underneath. A face shield is not, when we talk about eye protection, you can go double eye protection with the face shield and the safety glasses, but you still need the safety glasses for eye protection. The face shield will help, but it won't do enough. Got the earmuffs for hearing protection, a whistle for communication, which makes that, nice high-pitched sound that you could hear even if you're wearing earmuffs or earplugs. Got the high visibility vest on. You got the leg protection, and then gloves. So everything you need to be heading up a tree. And then on the right-hand side here, which I'm blocking a little bit, so I'll slide myself over. You can see you got the saddle, which has the fall protection and has all the rigging for safety. So another really important idea with safety is communication. And really the idea with communication is that you got to be aware of what you're doing and what others are doing. And you really have to be aware of what's happening at all times with what you're doing and what others are doing. So that starts off with having a job briefing at the beginning of the day. So what are all the tasks? What are your tasks? What are everybody else's tasks? What are the potential hazards involved with all the work that you're doing? What are all the mitigation techniques to avoid any of those potential hazards? So what are you going to do to avoid any of those hazards? And even walking through those scenarios, okay, so if we're working at this tree here, you can see the lean that it has. What are the potential problems that may happen with that tree? Even doing small little visualization, working through the problem, can really help people, if they end up in a moment of panic, just react in a certain way because you've already gone over it. So it's a really important thing to just kind of talk through and work through potential hazards and the way to mitigate those. And then any personal protective equipment that's needed for that job. But really, if you think about it and you're really concerned with safety, you should kind of already know what you need, because when we're talking about PPE, we're really talking about how are we going to protect ourselves. And when you're doing the job, you know what you need to protect. Everybody's got to be clear on the work plan. So what is all the work needed? How many days? How many hours? What are the different jobs? If you're doing this, what is somebody else doing? So we're all clear and we all know where everybody is at all times. And the big idea with communication in everything that I've been taught is the idea of it's clear and understood. And the second part is really important, because communication means not only did I say something, but that I said it to somebody and that they understood what I was saying. Because if they don't understand what I'm saying, then it's not communication. I just talked at somebody. And we're not trying to talk at people. We are trying to communicate. We're trying to make sure that I understand what's going on, and that whoever I'm talking to also understands what's going on, and that if they talk to somebody else, they understand what's going on, because then we're all on the same page. And the best way to make something understood is to make it as simple and as clear as possible. Now, that simple and clear does not mean dumbed down. Simple and clear just means that it's easy to understand. So, a quick example. We're gonna go fell a tree. Okay, so it's gonna be me and Anthony. Anthony's gonna be working with me. I'm gonna be on the saw. Anthony's gonna be my spotter. Everybody else is gonna be 2 tree lengths away. Right? Nice and simple. Lets everybody kind of understand. Now, if people have questions, we clear up anything else that's necessary. We don't dumb it down to, well, me and Anthony are going to go over here, we're going to cut down this tree, everybody else back up, we're good. We're not going for that. That's not going to be super clear. It's going to leave a lot of ambiguity. We want to be as clear as we can. We also want to be as concise as we can. We don't want to say a ton. If I sit here and tell you every step of cutting down this tree and it takes me half an hour to tell you about everything that you're doing, I probably lost you 2 minutes into the whole thing. So we've got to be concise, but we've got to be simple and clear so that it's understood what's happening and that everybody's on the same page. Just some things to understand. So if we're doing tree work and we're up in a tree, the idea of a drop zone and the idea of the area where things are going to fall and making sure that we've got people who are stay out of the drop zone. So I got a little video on drop zones right here. So if you want to pause this video, open up the notes, and then take a look at that video, now's a good time to pause. We also have drop zones in tree felling, and that's the idea of trying to be at least 2 tree lengths away. And if you have a hard idea, kind of...
Sorry, could you say that again? I'm having trouble hearing.
Understanding how far that would be, you really want to just think about the idea of, if this thing were to fall down, am I anywhere near it? Because if we're talking about 2 tree lengths, you want to be 2 tree lengths is far enough away to where you're like, there's not a chance in the world that this tree is going to fall down on me. So if you're anywhere where you're like, maybe, you're not far enough. If you're like, there's not a chance that this tree gets to me, now we're 2 tree lengths away. So some of the general safety that we cover in the chapter, and one of the big things with this idea of tree worker safety is this is really, in my mind and in other places that I've taught, this is like a whole semester's worth of information, and we're really cramming it into one lecture. So we're not really going in depth on a lot of stuff, but just kind of giving a general overview of a lot of these things. When we think about general safety, we want to think about emergency response, because we want to, if something bad happens, we want to be able to react quickly and react in the right way. So if you're working in trees, up in trees, you need to understand how to do an aerial rescue. If you're just working out in a group setting, CPR and understanding the steps of CPR is always a good idea. We're going to be working outdoors, so you really want to know poisonous plants and poisonous or venomous wildlife, depending on the area that you're working in. You really want to always have a fire extinguisher in your truck. You never know what will happen, especially if we're using machinery. Things happen. You've got oil, you got gas, those sorts of things. You always want to make sure that you have a fire extinguisher available. And then a really big one, especially in this idea of urban forestry, is temporary traffic control and having cones and signs and people trained in the idea of how do we actually make sure that if we're doing things on, a sidewalk or cutting down trees or branches that are hanging over a street, how do we actually divert traffic or stop traffic or be able to turn two-lane, two-way traffic into one-lane, two-way traffic. Those sorts of ideas are really important in terms of keeping us safe, because it's one thing for us to have to worry about ourselves and keep us and our crew safe, but then now if you bring in all the other people, that's where it becomes problematic. And then even just thinking about temporary traffic control, not in just the idea of cars and all that, but also foot traffic and, coning off an area or putting up tape or whatever it is to make sure that people walk around and don't enter into the work site if it's possible that they might hurt themselves in that work site. When dealing specifically with electrical hazards, we want to understand what an electrical conductor is, which is just any overhead or underground electrical device. So the ones you see normally on the sides of streets in urban areas, cable boxes, the power poles, those sorts of things are any of those are electrical conductors, and they're usually labeled really well. I have a hard time finding any sort of electrical conductor that doesn't have a lot of labeling around it because they want to avoid as many problems as they can. So trying to keep people away from those things because they could be problematic. The big thing with electrical hazards is just understanding the difference between direct contact and indirect contact. Direct contact is when any part of the body actually contacts the energized conductor versus indirect contact, which is any part of the body touches any conductive object that's in contact with the energized conductor. Obviously, if we have a choice, we'd rather make indirect contact than direct contact. I would prefer that we make no contact and not have to worry about it, because indirect contact is going to be a lot less charged than direct contact, and we have a much better chance of avoiding serious injury if it's indirect contact as opposed to direct contact. So then we get a large focus on chainsaw safety, which makes sense because we're doing tree work, and a lot of tree work, the chainsaw is quite a useful tool when it comes to tree work. And you can see that the chainsaw, even though it's a rather aggressive tool, is made with a lot of different safety features because it's important that that work is done right and that we try and minimize injury as much as possible. One of the biggest things before we even get deeper into chainsaw safety that I can mention when it comes to chainsaw safety is just the idea of knowing really what size saw you need. Everybody wants to pull out these big, huge saws that weigh like 50 pounds, and half the time you need a saw with a blade that's like this big to really get the majority of work done, but everybody wants to have these big, huge saws, and it's just unnecessary a lot of the time. If you're cutting down redwood trees all the time, sure, get the big, honking, huge Husqvarna saw. But if you're not, if you're working on a farm, or you're just working in an urban park setting where your biggest tree is 20 inches, you don't need a very big bar. You don't need a very big engine. You can get a nice light saw, much easier to control, much easier to maneuver, and that'll right away make everything else a lot easier because you're not dealing with this big, huge, heavy piece of equipment that's harder to handle. So, big thing to kind of just look at is the idea of how do people get injured with a chainsaw. And you can see it's spread out. There's head injuries, there's shoulder injuries, arm injuries, leg injuries, foot injuries. But the biggest thing that I want you guys to understand when you look at this chart is that where are the majority of injuries? And the majority of injuries are on the left-hand side of the body. And the reason for that is all chainsaws are designed to be operated on the right-hand side of the body. And so people don't think about the idea that I've got to keep it on the right-hand side of my body. Instead, what people do is they start cutting across their body or reaching over here to do stuff. And then what happens is your left side of your body becomes vulnerable because the chainsaw was designed to be operated on the right-hand side of your body. And if it's not operated on the right-hand side of your body, if it's operated anywhere else, now places become vulnerable. So, just like I just mentioned, Chainsaws are designed to be operated on the right-hand side of the body. It should always be kept over here. Never moved here, never moved here, kept here. And this is the plane that you work in, is on the right-hand side of your body. Kickback, you'll hear the term kickback. That's the saw pushing back towards the operator. So the idea that you are digging into something and all of a sudden the chainsaw comes back at you. That's kickback. So how do we prevent kickback, and how do we prevent having all sorts of problems from kickback? So one of them is to make sure that we have a thumb wrap. So you'll see people, because people kind of drive like this. You get your thumb right here and you're kind of relaxing, sort of thing. Some people will drive like that. When you operate a chainsaw, full finger wrap and your thumb wrapped underneath to make sure you've got a nice solid grip on the handle. You never want to operate the saw above shoulder level. You can have the saw body down here. The bar can be up above your shoulder, but you want to always keep the body of the saw, the engine, below your shoulder, because there you have control. If it's up here, you don't have control if it starts to kick around. If you're a climber, if you're a tree climber operating a saw, you must use a second method of securing yourself before cutting, and you also really want to be aware of the position of the climbing line, your safety lanyards, your ropes, or basically anything that you could accidentally cut through that you really don't want to cut through. So here's a few pictures. Easiest one here, if we're operating a saw, we want to have 2 feet on the ground unless we're a tree climber. And if we're a tree climber, then we're not going to be up on a ladder like this. We're going to be attached. We're going to have our harness and everything with our safety lanyards and our ropes, and we're going to do it correctly. Here's this idea of kickback. Anytime the upper part of the blade makes contact with the wood, that's an easy way for the saw to get kicked back towards your face, as we see being demonstrated right here. And this is the perfect example when you see the way that the saw is turned here, of this idea that the left side of the body now comes into play with that kickback and can become problematic. The other thing that also becomes problematic, and we did see some injuries on the right hand side, but usually they were lower injuries on the right hand side, is people getting tired. You rest the saw on your leg and all of a sudden you cut your leg, or you get tired and you kind of let the saw drop and all of a sudden you cut your right boot, sort of a thing. Those are things you really want to try and avoid. Is if you get tired, then the way you deal with that is you wait for the chainsaw to stop, wait for the chain to stop moving, you turn the brake on, you turn it off, and you put it down. And then you relax and you take water, or you do whatever you need to do. But you don't take a break while the saw is running. You don't take a break while you're holding the saw. You put it down, you put it off to the side, you make sure it's good, and then you take a break. Proper cutting position. Let me move myself out of the way because I think this does an excellent job of showing it. So the plane of chain rotation. So the idea that we want to have the saw off to the right hand side of our body. Well, Professor, how do I then cut something if it's over on my left? Easily. You slide your body over to the left. And then you slide your body over farther to the left so that you can keep cutting on the right hand side of your body. You move your body, not the saw. Because you want to have this open plane of chain rotation here, where if it goes through the wood here, we're fine, nothing in the way. If it kicks back, nothing in the way. That's what we're looking for. We want to make sure we've got this good, strong grip with our thumb wrapped. We want to make sure our feet, lost my mouse for a second, right here. We want to make sure that our feet are not underneath anything that's falling down. So we can see right here his boot's a little far in front there, so if I was standing there, I might tap him, and if I was to tap him, I'm going to tap him on his left side because I know the saw's on his right side, and so if I tap him on the left side, I can let him know, hey, you may want to move your foot. Don't want that falling down on you. We also know that he looks like he's got on pretty good protection. Got on hardtack, got on hearing protection, we got on long sleeves, gloves, good sturdy boots, everything that we're looking for in terms of proper use. We just need to get him to move that foot back, and we're all good in terms of proper cutting. So just another look at the idea. So our PPE, helmet, ear protection. This guy's not big on the long sleeves and the gloves. Like I said, that stuff is a should wear. It's not required. However, I think when you're really focused on safety, you should find a way to make it work. He's got on his chainsaw chaps, hard, sturdy boots. 2 hands firmly gripping the saw. You can see even though the saw is turned to the side here, he's still got the thumb wrapped around and still got a good grip on it. And then we've got some ideas here for things to check with the saw before you start it, things to check if you're fueling the saw, and just some safety tips to think about. Big one is just the idea of looking at the tree and making sure you got a nice clean area that you're cutting into, so that you're not hitting any metal or anything else that could cause any sort of an issue with putting the chainsaw into the tree. One thing to note is he's got the saw turned here, so it's really important to still think about that plane of rotation. So if the saw kicks back here, probably not a big deal, but you really want to think about where the body of this saw is, as opposed to the blade, because the idea is if this thing kicks back, as long as the body of the saw is kicking back into his leg and the blade's finishing way out here, no big deal, nothing in the way. Same thing with if it were to go through this tree here, and it goes through, as long as the body of the saw is hitting against the chaps and not any of the blade, then you're good. So you really want to make sure of that, because if the blade could possibly hit you, you're not standing in the correct position. So then we go over tree felling, which is a huge deal. It's complicated work. It's really important that when you do it right, because ultimately it can lead to death. It can lead to serious injury, because that wood is much heavier than you think, and it can move much faster than you think. And so you really want to make sure that you do it in the most correct way to avoid any serious problems. So the book talks about 3 notch cuts. Let me slide myself. We're going to start here on the right here. So you got your regular conventional cut, which is what's being described here, but they also have a Humboldt cut, which would be the same flat cut here, but then you go underneath. And then also you got your open notch, which I kind of call the Pac-Man, which you got open there and open down there. So those are the 3 different notch cuts that you can have. And then you really want to make sure that if you're doing the Humboldt cut or the conventional, that your back cut's slightly higher than your cut. If you're doing the open face, you want to go even on your back cut with your front cut. Really important, and we'll focus in on the next couple slides, but really important, this idea that when we're doing these cuts, we really only need to go a little ways in on the first cuts. You're, in this case, 1/4 to 1/3 of the tree's diameter. 1/3 is kind of the number I've always been told. And when you look down here and you see the face cut this guy's doing, you're like, well, that's not enough. That's plenty enough. People usually really overestimate this, because you want to make more of a felling cut, a back cut, than you do in a front cut, because in the front cut, I'm here in front of the tree. In the back cut, I'm behind the tree. I've got my escape routes where I can get away from this thing, and I'm out from in front of where it's trying to go. And it'll go with a decent little front cut. You don't need to put a real deep cut into this thing to get it to go. So here is another look at that, if we're looking at a cross section of it. So this is what we would take out with our front cut. This is what we would take out with our back cut, which you can see is the majority of the tree, and then we're hoping for just a little bit of hinge wood. This is what it looks like in reality. So there's our felled direction. This is our hinge wood, that wood that holds together and breaks off. And you can see this is how much of a back cut they made, because you can see the nice smooth area as opposed to the place where the wood fibers were still together. Another look at it here. So this is your conventional notch here, nice and steep angle on that, because it's an easier cut to make, and it's just going to make it more of a hinge for it to fall. And that means if this is where our notch is, then our felling direction is that way. We've got our felling cut, which we want to go just a little bit above our bottom cut on our notch, and then that's going to leave some hinge wood. It's really important to make sure we're getting all the way across on our felling cut, and we're bringing it all the way in. And the last thing I'll say about the idea of the felling cut is, as soon as the tree starts to go, where you don't need to keep cutting and you don't need to stick around, as soon as you know the tree's going, which is why you really want to use a spotter when you do this, then you just back on out of your at your 45-degree escape route. And you really want to make sure too, because the saw is going to be going, right? As soon as it starts to go, we want to hit that chain brake and go, because we don't want to be carrying the saw while it's still moving. If you want to pause the video right now and take a look at the Husqvarna Chainsaw Academy, it explains this in a little more detail. So go ahead and pause right now. So just another look at it. This is the recommended open notch, or the Pac-Man that I like to call it, that the book talks about. So in this picture here, they're saying 1/5 of the trunk diameter. Nobody's going to be out there measuring, was this a quarter, was this a third, was this a fifth? But it doesn't have to go deep into the tree. And that's the really big thing that you have to understand, is it doesn't have to go deep. Your felling cut, if you're doing the open notch, should be right on that same distance, or the same plane as the kind of the edge of the mouth of the open cut. You want to go on that same plane, and then we want to leave a little bit of hinge wood, and hopefully the tree is falling before you ever get that close to the hinge. If we're leaving, we want to go out at a 45-degree angle away from the direction of the fall. And that's, it's really important just to understand the idea of the going away from the direction of the fall. I know this picture, it shows him leaving his chainsaw there. I don't know that you need to do that. I would say as long as you put on that chain brake to make sure that that your chain's not moving anymore, then you're good to go. Just the idea of 45 degrees, and if you say to yourself, well, I don't know about 45 degrees, just not straight back, not straight forward, and not straight out to the sides. Out and back to the left, out and back to the right. And this situation has definitely happened to me before, is, well, what if you can't go out and back to the left? Well, as long as I got out and back to the right, then I'm good. And if those aren't available, then you need to cut yourself a route before you even start to cut down the tree, which I've had to do before. Or also checking that route and making sure, if I have to move quickly in this direction, what do I have in terms of, are there little like stubs or anything that might trip me up, or vines that I might get caught on, and make sure we get rid of that stuff before you take that safety route. And in the worst case scenario, really super dense forest, having to take down a tree, you don't really have those escape routes, then looking at things like other bigger trees, that if this tree were to come back, that tree would stop it and get in the way, and where you could kind of hide behind those things. Hopefully you don't have to deal with that sort of a thing, but there's other ways to think about it, and really just think about, how am I going to get out of this before you ever start doing it. and before there's a problem or anything. How am I going to get out of here safely? Because I don't want there to be a problem. And if you really think about it that way, the answer should be obvious. So if we're going over just tree felling in general, the whole thing, assess the site. So what's going on here? Where am I trying to drop this thing? What are all the potential hazards? How would I mitigate them? How am I going to do this? What does a perfect tree fall look like? What are the things that could go wrong? Assess the tree. Is it sound? Is it a good tree? Is it going to hold the way that it should? Or do I have issues going on inside the tree that, the tree might go, or the tree might barber chair, or do any of these things? Prepare the work area and escape route. Make sure that you're good to go and get out the way that you need to. Use correct, safe felling techniques, making sure we're not going very deep into the tree at the beginning and letting our back cut do the majority of the work. And we're going to retreat and look up correctly at the tree. And as we retreat, we want to be looking up because we want to make sure we know where the tree's going at all times. So I've got a couple of videos here. So go ahead and pause the video and click on those and take a look. With a chipper, something I've spent a lot of time using, big ideas. Feed brush from the side of the intake area and the feed table. And as soon as you do that, you want to move away after the brush is fed. You want to put it in and move away because sometimes stuff comes back out, or moving away right away lets us know if anything on us is stuck or anything like that. And, this thing is pulling stuff in. So, some of the limbs, if you've got a tree that's really spread out, some of those limbs are going to start, getting pushed and changed angles. And so you might get whacked by something. So you want to put it in and then you want to move away. You want to put the larger butt in first because it's simpler for the machine to grab and start pulling everything in as opposed to the little limbs with the leaves on them. And then if you've got small limbs, because you don't want to go sticking your hand in where this thing's got all these gears and grinding up, you want to use the larger limbs to push the smaller limbs in. So usually a chipper has a feed tray area, and you can put the small limbs on there and then just take a big limb and kind of shove it on in there and push it in that way. You really want no part of the operator, being your body, reaching past the back edge of the infeed chute. You really don't want to be, if you think about it, if you're off to the side like you're supposed to do, it's going to be really hard for you to get your arm or anything else in into an area where it's problematic. So make sure that you're off to the side. And make sure you're not standing directly behind that thing because you don't want anything shooting out and hitting you. And they've got signs all over these things to make sure that you do it correctly. So make sure that you be real safe with the chipper. This one's a great chipper because it's got this winch on it, so you don't have to get anywhere near it. But you can see he's off to the side. They've got cones set up, doing a little bit of temporary traffic control. Pulling that thing in there. Because obviously they got to take the winch off because you're not going to have the winch go into the chipper. If you're going to push this thing, you're not going to grab it by that butt end close that's trying to get into the chipper. You're going to go back to the middle of this stem here, push it from there. Once you see the butt end get grabbed by the chipper, then you back off and the thing will pull it in and do all the work. And you really just want to make sure that you're not putting yourself in danger, which is putting yourself basically in between some big limb like this and the gears and the grinders on the inside of this thing. So when you're off to the side, when you don't have lots of dangling clothing, when you're not in between what's trying to be chipped and the chipper, you're probably pretty good. With palm trees, the big thing with palm trees is you want to work from above, like we see this gentleman doing, because there's a worry of sloughing of palm skirts. Palm skirts are just several years of dead palm fronds, and dead fronds we've talked about are the idea of any of the ones that they've lost that color and they're hanging below that 90 degrees. Anything that's hanging below is the dead fronds. But we want to work from above that, because working from below that, those things can come off at any time. They're heavier than you think, and people actually suffer not only crushing injuries from that, but also people have been suffocated because they weigh a ton, they can't get you out in time, and then you're just stuck there. So if possible, use an aerial device, and really you just want to be using an aerial device because you don't want to be trying to deal with those from below. My mother-in-law tells a story about how a palm frond randomly fell on my wife, and her sister fell on the baby carriage, and she was super nervous. Big old palm frond falls on top. She takes it off, and they were fine, luckily. But it just randomly happened. A windy day sort of a thing. So that, hopefully that wasn't that big of a deal, but that was also one palm frond. But now when we talk about these palm skirts, we're talking about 10 or 12 or 5 or 6 or whatever it is, all combined together coming down at the same time. It's a lot of weight, and it's heavier than you think, and it can become really problematic. And then with first aid, the big thing with first aid is we cannot cover, it's weeks and weeks worth of information. So what I've done is I've attached a wilderness first aid pocket guide and a wilderness and remote first aid manual. And one is like a quick reference and one is more detailed, but I've attached those there so that you guys can have something that you can look up right away and, all right, this is happening, what should I do? And here's the steps, because I think that's the best way to do it. Well, I take that back. The best way to do it is to get trained as a first responder and get trained in CPR and be comfortable with all that. And if we're not going to do that, the second best thing we can do is make sure we have a quick reference guide so we know what to do and what are the proper steps to make sure that we keep ourselves happy and healthy. And that's a quick little overview, but I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope when you go out there and do that work that you keep yourself as safe as possible, because safety is an attitude, and if you make it a part of your culture, if you make people understand that safety is important, then hopefully any sort of mistakes that you have will be minimized to the best amount possible.